I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP. And first and foremost, I would like to say thank you for viewing this video and visiting my channel. This is my return. However, I am only able to operate under a limited capacity for this is the last day of my spring break. And I will not be able to make videos with the same consistency and regularity that I had in the past so long as the semester still continues. But seeing how I have taken care of most of the responsibilities I needed to take care of during spring break, I thought that I would go ahead and initiate the video series I am going to do on the 16 types. So this will be my first video on types, and the type I'm starting with would be my favorite type, and this video will be on INFPs. So, first off, I will say this, that INFPs are very complex creatures. And what I mean is that each individual type has a basis for experience, at least a perceptive mode at which they take into the world and feel as if, or at least act as if the world acts on them in a particular manner. And what I mean is this: there can be a dichotomy between the qualitative experience one has in the world and what I say the objective experience one has in the world. There are those types that really perceive, or at least have the perception that they perceive the world as objects first and then derive meaning, and there are individuals who think that they perceive the world in terms of meaning first and abstract objects from the meaning that they receive from the environment. There are very real those aspects are true at different levels of analyses and physiological and cognitive neuroscientific senses, that at certain levels of analyses by way of the retina and the substrate in which it travels, it's very interesting that the neurological pathway that the eye takes is mapped onto various aspects of the brain, insofar as that the substrate branches off into the amygdala, it branches off to the spine, it branches off to various aspects of the body, insofar as it has a role in orientating one to act and to receive information. But it's very real that the eye recognizes patterns in a multitude of ways, and that perception is a very complex thing, insofar as that there are two different modes in which people approach the environment, one being objective and one being qualitative. The INFP, because they are introverted feeling types and they are extroverted in extroverted tuition, sits at the dominance of their psychic constitution, per se, by way of the top two tiers of their 8 cognitive functional stack, is how I'm viewing the cognitive functional stacks. The two dominant directors of their value systems are one that is ultimately concerned with impressionistic elements, and one that is ultimately concerned with associative elements. It is to say that the primary basis of their being is qualitative, or the primary mode of their perception is one that is qualitative, and it is one that is concerned with meaning first, objects secondarily. And that is something that you will see mostly in all of the NFs, that it is meaning first and objects secondarily. But that is the first basis I would like to start at in describing the INFP's nature, insofar as this, that introverted feeling is their dominant function. And I've made videos on introverted feeling prior to this, but something that I am noticing more so now, post those videos, is that all feeling is an embodied phenomenon. Is that feeling itself, though it is a rational function, is one that is by way of the various systems that act as a substrata or the substratum of our of our physical existence and the things that direct us per se in the environment as the environment acts on us. As we are experiencing things, we have the way that meaning is made manifest to us. And the way that meaning is made manifest to us, or I suppose one, depending on one's view on the issue, the way that meaning is abstracted or taken from the environment, the way that those things happen are very really where our emotions emerge from and direct us per se. That all NFs, but really INFPs, are ethical moralists insofar as that they are having a breadth of subjective experiences, and I mean subjective experiences in this way, that there are multiple levels of being that one comes into the world as. That's very much an existential idea, that you come into the world, but there's multiple levels, and the phenomenologist, Heidegger particularly, had very interesting language to describe this, and it's essentially you have the world, you have your culture, and you have yourself, and the INFP is very much taking in all of the layers of resolution that they exist in, and these different structures and resolutions of meaning in respects to their self is creating items of existential property, insofar as that they are either self-affirming or self-negating. So the INFP is very much a existential phenomenologist in their being. They are concerned with what it means to exist, insofar as how things are made manifest to them by way of the subject, and how they ought to act in response to that. Now, that's very interesting when you look at their cognitive functions, because their extroverted mode of being is one that is associative. So they have to go out into the world, and they have to look at things and take things in. That's very interesting, and why INFPs are interesting, because they're mopey explorers. They trot around and they experience people and the world in a very nuanced and amorphous wave-like manner. Because of their dominant introverted feeling being a real phenomenological thing. And I suppose it would make more sense for me to break this down first, and to say that the INFP, their the meta aspect of their existence is that they experience meaning in the world. The meaning makes itself emergent to them, and it either affirms the self or disavows the self, and they are constantly trying to figure out, how do I best approximate myself to that which is self-affirming, or to that which is life-giving, and how do I distance myself, or what do I do in response to the things in the world that are essentially self-negating or ultimately nihilistic. And it's nihilistic in the way that I'm using it. It's not to say that an INFP can't be a nihilist, but typically you don't find that with INFPs, and typically they won't say that. It's not like they're coming from a healthy place when they say that there's no meaning to life. INFPs, by way of the root of their existence, are meaning-based individuals, as they find the qualitative aspects of life to be stronger in their perceptual landscape than anything else. They orientate themselves in the environment by way of meaning first, and they abstract objects from the meaning. The meaning precedes the object does not precede the meaning for the INFP. And it is because of their dominant introverted feeling that they are like this. An introverted feeling as a function is something that is concerned with the primordial elements and the primordial constituencies of our existence as human beings. It is anthropomorphic in its structure. And what I mean by anthropomorphic is that we are, in my vantage point, from how I see things, we are evolved things. And that there are base competing drives, per se, that structure what it means to be human, that are independent meaning factor generators in of themselves. For example, our need for sex produces a whole nother layer of meaning and how we are going to essentially orientate and appropriate ourselves to things in the environment just by itself alone. Hunger is another thing. It's just that our structure as organisms has a very real landscape that generates a tremendous amount of meaning, and meaning is that thing that determines our set of actions and what our actions mean and what things mean when they are made manifest towards us. Can we bear the pain, the suffering, and the inevitability and unavoidability of death in life? Essentially, meaning is the psychological substance that allows for us to continue to exist in spite of the very precarious and contentious elements that are to our existence. Meaning is essentially what makes us organisms, and that is, what that is made manifest by a very real stratum of a collection of things that the INFP is so grossly aware of. And these are things, because they exist in the midbrain and the lower brain, that don't lend themselves to articulation. So that is primarily why it is hard for, I think, at least in my own speculation on the type, why it is hard for them to say all that it is that they feel, that they know, and they experience. Because feeling is a set of action potentials, and feeling is something that is made manifest by way of existence. Because they feel. It is analogous to cogito ergo sum, as I think, therefore I am. But because they feel things, they are. That is why INFPs are real, or are concerned with authenticity, and that everything in the world is real to them. Their experience is real to them. It's so interesting that you cannot talk to an INFP about something being fantastical, and why the fantastical elements and aspects of existence so far in our imagination are so visceral and palatable to them as individuals, and they come wrought with such intensity because it is the realness of being that is at the very core of what they are, and their very existence is asking the real ethical question insofar as what actions, what beliefs, and what structures constitutes life in existence, or insofar as brings life or gives life in existence, and what are those things that disavow it or lead away from it. And I will champion that which brings it, and I will villainize that which doesn't, which is why there's a very real moral compass in them, per se, and they can have a very stark and real polarity and contrast between good and evil. Essentially the story of existence will always be at the heart of them, and it will be what they're acting out, and it will be what they're concerned with. That differs. That's something that's a bit fundamental to all NFs, but shows up in a very specific way in INFPs, and where sort of the authenticity emerges, because it is so innate to what they are, and they know that there is no other way that they exist, that is all that they can display, and that is all that they can be. and that's primarily what they're communing with. And it's so interesting with extroverted intuition, insofar as this is that it takes them out into the world, and they are these downtrodden, awe-inspiring phenomenologists, mopey existentialists. That's the way I would say that they are, because very really they have a strong leaning towards being open as individuals, and they are extremely open to the associations and obviously to the things that that become manifest to them in their subjective landscape. But the thing about INFPs being wholly subjective creatures is not entirely true, as they do have an empirical bent to them, as in they're always vigilant in watching things. That's one thing that I notice about their extroverted intuition, that they are seeing what's happening out in the world and making the necessary associations by way of what they're seeing. They are, in some ways, because they know the fundamental aspects, like the range and the variability of how being can make itself manifest. They know the beautiful qualities of people, and they know the horrific ones. They essentially know where heaven and hell exists in all aspects of, if they're not delusional per se, but they know where heaven and hell exist in all aspects of nature, society, and other psyche and their own psyche. So they can smell a rat, or they can smell when somebody's being disgenuine, particularly being disgenuine and having ulterior motives. They are really the clinicians and the diagnosticians of malevolent intentions and will, by way of their need for sort of empirical robustness. They have to, and it's very interesting because they will sit in their rooms and stuff, but then there's a certain point in time where they have to go out and explore. And it's just this interesting dynamic between the primordial elements that make them up and their need for meaning and their complete openness to what is. Like, they are metaphysicians in some respects. I know I'm using all these words to describe them, but they are complex, and that's why they're so creative, because they're such great differing degrees in the aspects of their cognition, at least the ones in which that they value. And that's something you'll see that I bring up in all the types per se, but it's really interesting in the INFPs because it leads to such great transformative aspects to them. Insofar as this, that I've said in other videos that they create the self, and I think I've addressed to the greatest extent what I mean by that. But why that's salient insofar as the relation of extroverted intuition in their psyche and sort of the connection it has to introverted sensing is that INFPs, the reason that they can be people like Joan of Arc and the reason that they can be such transformative agents within the society at large, or whatever community they're a part of, is because they do have this distance between static meaning. And it's one thing I'm noticing in introverted feeling is that introverted feeling is very much meaning driven, but introverted sensing is in the same way. It's that introverted feeling seems to have a greater openness towards the way that meaning can make itself manifest by way of its communing with the lower anthropomorphic structures, much more general aspects of what it means to be human per se. Like, introverted feeling knows primarily what it is to exist. it knows it to a very strong extent. And it is not articulate or procedural type. It's not an articulable or procedural type of knowledge like that which TI or TE comes up with, but it is very much one that is rooted and grounded in experience, or grounded in being or existence. And that's why I'll switch between calling them phenomenologists or existentialists, or saying they're being concerned with metaphysics, what is. And introverted sensing, it is analogous in this manner, but what it tries to do, insofar as what is relevant and salient to it, because it's impressionistic in its makeup, is try to find fixed patterns of meaning that it can always rely on. And it essentially tries to stultify and make something static, per se. It's somewhat totalitarianistic in its nature, as it's trying to find fixed meaning patterns and fixed systems of meaning. So an INFP, because they have this repressed introverted sensing by way of their extroverted intuition, they are vigilant insofar as they're looking for nihilism to appear wherever. It's so interesting. They're looking for it to show up in certain ways. And kind of how they're doing this is that they know, not in a way that's conscious to them, but very really unconscious, what are the relevant meaning structures that are at the heart of their society or their way of life or their mode of being. They have this very real relationship with the Verdenkeit, that and the mid-wealth and the Weldenwelt. And those are Heidegger's words for saying the midlife of existence, the exterior life of existence, and the personal life of existence. They have this very real dynamic where they are plugged up between all three, from by way of their introverted feeling being plugged in with the self, the introverted intuition, the extroverted intuition, polar introverted intuition, inferior extroverted thinking. I'll get to that. But the tertiary introverted sensing, they're plugged into something that is bigger than themselves while being wholly concerned with themselves. Sort of the cultural aspects that make them up. And they know when there's a shift in them. And they kind of know when that shift, per se, is why they can be diagnosticians about the status, of culture and where it's going. It's so real to them that they see nihilism because they look at what it is that they value and is life-affirming and where that comes from in the culture at large, and then they extrapolate that onto other people in the culture, because what INFPs essentially do, they say, if I feel this way, then there's a good chance, because they are really, even though it's subjective, it's so strange, it is the general makeup of what is, per se. It's metaphysical in its aspects and its totality. It is what it means to be human, per se, in them. So they say, if I feel this way, then most likely other people are feeling this way. So Nietzsche, it's very interesting because he's an introverted feeler, tertiary introverted feeler, could do the same thing as an INTJ, but INFPs really can spot out, like they can spot out their next greatest degree and variability of the qualitative aspects of their existence is to be vigilant. They watch, and man, I'm telling you, they see, we call it their moral vigilance, or their bent towards being very ethical individuals, but what they see is death, and death by way of what is too jostling and rapid of a transformation or an evolution, and some static system of meaning that exists in the mid-welt, that exists in the midlife, or that exists in the culture, that exists, that is connected to me, but exists extended beyond me. And they get these impressions from their environment, and they are very aware of them. those things don't necessarily influence them per se. They are affected by them, and they can very much know by way of their own subjective experience and by the way that the meaning makes itself manifest to them. When something occurs out in the world, they know, like they're like bloodhounds, they're on nihilism in a second. They know that this is not going to go well and it's going to lead to a great deal of death. It doesn't have to be literal death per se, but it can be like the death of something that they hold sacred, or the death of some aspect that they see as life affirming or fundamentally human. You cannot dehumanize an INFP, and they will not stand for the dehumanization of reality. It is so interesting in why even when they are scattered in their speech, and because they have inferior extroverted thinking, so they're not like super articulate in terms of rational speak. At least they may have a hard time in being so. They are so intense. They're so intense and vigilant because they can see. It's very real to them, and why even as they as Christians, or if they have paranormal experiences, or greater metaphysical experiences, or imaginative impressions, like they are imaginative beings because they are very open to their experience and their cognition and what the world is feeding to them as secondary perceiving types. But the real the intensity comes because they are qualitatively based, and they're taking meaning first and deriving objects from it, and it's hitting them. It's so hitting them. It's being awash through the a priori ontological system that is their way of value structures, insofar as that they're creators of themselves and their values. There is a very real matrix or framework per se by way of a meaning filter or a rich ultraviolet spectrum like an aurora borealis, insofar as that they would be creatures of magnetism, that the things pass through the spectrum and they have their dynamic and interaction with this spectrum, and it releases some type of energy or some type of wave in them, a real manifestation that has an emotional impression to them that causes them to act, because for them to feel is to act. They may not act out in the world per se because they're perceiving types, but it is much analogous to me. For me it is to think is to act. I see thinking as an action. For them, feeling is very much an action because they are meaning first. They are qualitative first before they are anything else. And that object has no orientation or relation to them outside of their own meaning. And that is why I say TI and FI are much like the Judeo-Christian God, insofar as that it is willful, and it is by its own will, majesty, and experience that it makes judgments or will make things manifest, but things primarily manifest to them by way of their own being. Things emerge out of their being. Nothing gets apart or by way from their being. That's why I say it's all in all. It's because so for example, if you talk to an INFP and you say things, they are so strongly listening to what you say, first off. Do not ever, because they are vigilant. They are extremely vigilant, because they're making sense out of what makes meaning. They're not making sense out of what makes rational sense. And you will get a real edict from an INFP that, you know what, if you're thinking something that ultimately disavows yourself and is cancerous and brings death to you, it's probably wrong. And they will not they may not be able to articulate why they think it's wrong, but they are viscerally stricken with what you're saying is wrong because of how it rubs against the core of the foundation of the meaning structures that exist in them. They're qualitative, and what I mean is they are listening to what you say, and if it strikes them in that manner, even if it's justified necessarily, because it's not to say that they're completely infallible, they're going to go there. And it's to say that the qualitative aspect is the differentiator for them in a lot of ways, and what people sort of have issue with them about, but I think is just a very fundamental aspect of what it means to be human, and I enjoy their existence and see them as wholly salient and necessary, and this is the role that I see that they can serve, because I said before, they really know where heaven and hell exist, per se, and that's sort of where their innate dichotomy between what's morally right and what's evil emerges from. They know hell and heaven in nature. They know hell and heaven in personal experience. They know hell and heaven in whatever you can name it. Like how food could be bad, how it could be good. They have this poetic, romantic lens to them and mythological vantage point to them in life that they make a narrative and a motif essentially out of everything, because that's really the innate way that people will communicate. There was narrative before there was rationality, and they are really the oldest form of human, I think, insofar as cognition, per se. I think INFPs and certain types existed before other types really did in the evolution of personality. But INFPs are an archetypal expression. They're like to the core of what it means to be human, and I very really mean this. And there's neurological and physiological reasons for that, insofar as that our physiology, and I alluded to it before in talking about the eye, but we are not rational individuals, and I said this about the drives. We're not wholly homogeneous things. There are very real aspects to us that are impersonal and not concerned with necessarily our conscious volition or our conscious will, and it directs us and creates impressions in us and is very really moving us, and it's where the school of psychoanalytical thought emerged from. You're not this homogeneous thing. You're not a cute little singular self. You have a self, but it's not one indivisible whole like people spontaneously believe from their own localized experience. And INFPs know this, per se, and they're communing with all of this. And I'm sorry, the point I was making is that they know heaven and hell exists at every level, and they have a very much like meerkat sense. And like, you know how meerkats, well, maybe you don't. Meerkats, they have these communities and they have these homes and things, but they're always on the lookout for predators. Like, they're always on the lookout. They're so vigilant. INFPs, they know heaven and hell. They have this mythopoetic lens. They know what's morally right and what's morally wrong, and they're on the lookout for it. They're concerned with it because you want to find meaning in life. Follow an INFP around or follow an ENFP around. They're not too far from behind it, insofar as that is what they're after. They're straight gunning for that, and everything else comes secondarily and bows down to it. That's why their experience is qualitative over being objective, and I don't mean that pejoratively. And their role in society is this, that for very really, because INFPs repress extroverted intuition, extroverted thinking, and they have a tertiary relationship with their introverted sensing. They can have a flippancy, and obviously their introverted feeling does not like to be influenced by the outside world. They can have a flippancy with facts and they can be skeptical of the fixed patterns of meaning that society presents to them. And they're wholly aware of them. They're not completely conscious of their introverted sensing, but they're very real of what it's telling them. And it's telling them things in relation to meaning, and so far as the meaning structures that make up society. They know how those things are existing, but they know sort of on the higher law that they are deriving things from, or the higher moral order that they're pulling things from by the way of the base anthropomorphic structures of introverted feeling. They know very really if that thing is in a certain place, and it's something that's so interesting about them is that they're phenomenological insofar as that they take things as like if they're angry, they're in a place. If they're happy, they're in a place. If they're sad, they're in a place. If they're whatever, they're in a place. They're in a state of being, per se. It's like their states of being have variabilities in terms of energy generation. They can very much, their complex of self emerges and is directed and pulled in various directions by way of the places that they're in. And they can very much sort of track, like little meerkats, where things are going or what ideological motifs exist or what ideas exist in a society and how close those things are approximately to heaven and hell. And why that they can look, per se, at something, listen to what somebody's saying, read what's going on or hear what's going on or whatever, and then start to make some sort of grand campaign to revivify and transform culture in some way, in some aspect. And they are the dying savior in a lot of ways. NFs are that in a lot of ways, but they are, INFPs are that in a very real way, insofar as that they have the ability to say, what is that which leads to life and what is that which leads to death, in a very rough sense. And they say, what is that thing in the environment and what impression is it giving me? If it's giving me this impression, then what is that doing to mankind? And if that's doing that to mankind, where is it going to take mankind? Insofar as its being. Not maybe in its objective sense, but what does it mean to be and what does it mean to exist? They are so concerned with that, it's not even funny. And it's why you should be, one should be sort of conscious on how they're talking to them about things, because they're concerned with something that is fundamental and foundational, and something that's just not easily articulable. It's just not easy to talk about. And it takes a great deal. It takes thousands of years typically for people, such as in religious systems, to articulate all of the aspects of consciousness and being that they're actively processing. Like, I have no idea what it is like to go out into the world as a being that is qualitatively based, insofar as that I receive meaning first before receiving an object. At least in my, because I'm so rationally bent, I see objects first, and I don't really denote meaning to them or imbue meaning to them. That's why, and then I do it secondarily by way of my emotions and my thinking don't speak to one another. But to move myself out of the picture is to say that INFPs are amazingly fantastical creatures insofar as that they have a very real mode of being to them that is wholly unique. It's not so unique. It's wholly unique insofar as this, that it is deeply what it means to be human. It's like all too human in a lot of ways. Now, to say this, that what they are motivated to be is to be an ethical agent, is to be a moral agent. They are concerned mostly with what actions and what thoughts bring life or death. And that's just what they are so after. And it's not in a literal sense, but a phenomenological one. That is why they are always beings of spirituality, and why their heritage and their emotions and the emergent properties and stratum of life have so much salience to them. And it's where their art comes from, because they are the creators of mythology, they are the creators of symbols, they are the creators of religion. They have to very really be at an interface with the world in a way such that they guide the creation and the expression of the self for all of eternity, and they will be the arbiters and guardians of what it means to be human and what it means to exist in the qualitative and phenomenological aspects of what it means to be. And in that way, that is the INFP and my analysis of them. Thank you for watching this video.